Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking some seriously heavy formal theological logic and turning into a gorgeous blueprint of absolute reality. We're looking at the ADI framework, or Absolute Divine Infinity. This isn't just throwing around big concepts. It's a completely rigorous mathematical map drawing the ultimate line in the sand between everything that's created and the totally uncreated reality of the Creator. Here's how we're going to break this down today. First, the two domains of reality. Second, the false deity trap. Then, the cognitive idol theorem. Fourth, the descent of revelation. And finally, why score it 109.9. All right, part one, two domains of reality. So, to really build this foundation, we have to slice all of existence into two completely non-overlapping domains. First up, domain D. Now, I want you to imagine every single galaxy, every crazy multiverse, every abstract math equation, and every unseen realm you can possibly think of. Honestly, even stuff well beyond human comprehension. All of that staggering, mind-bending scale, that's just domain D. It's literally the totality of created reality. If it can be hypothesized or modeled, it lives right here.
Then, completely separate from all that vastness, we have domain G. And this domain is defined strictly as a law's uncreated divine reality alone. It's necessary, it's 100% independent, self-sufficient, and absolute. You know, it's actually absolutely crucial to grasp that domain G isn't just like the top floor of domain D. It's not a place. It's fundamentally, categorically uncreated.
For the longest time, people kind of assumed the ultimate divide was between physical and non-physical stuff, right? But the true boundary here is createdness versus uncreatedness. Created things, no matter how big or infinite, depend on something else. Uncreated reality, completely self-sufficient. Which brings us to this incredibly elegant central axiom. D intersection G equals the empty set. Basically, absolutely no created reality can ever cross into uncreatedness. There is zero crossover. You can't just take something in domain D, inflate it to an infinite size, and boom, it magically crosses into domain G. No way. That boundary is absolute. Moving on to part two, the false deity trap. Once you lock in that absolute boundary, this framework ruthlessly exposes what happens when we get it wrong. The source material calls this the recursive false deity theorem. See, idolatry isn't just ancient people bowing to stone statues. It's actually a massive category error. It's what happens when we accidentally hand over uncreated, divine status to something that firmly belongs in domain D. Like, say, elevating the universe itself, or the laws of quantum physics, or even some wild mathematical abstraction, and treating it like the ultimate reality. Which brings up a really fascinating, super modern question. Say physics suddenly proves there's a truly infinite multiverse. If something is truly infinite in its scale and scope, does that make it God? Well, the mathematical answer in the ADI framework is a hard no. Infinity does not equal uncreatedness. An infinite hierarchy of universes inside domain D is still exactly that, endless creation. Infinity is really just a structured vocabulary word we use inside creation. Endlessness is impressive, for sure, but it is a totally different ballgame from being uncreated.
All right, part three, the cognitive idol theorem.
Now let's turn the lens inward, because there's a profound trap hiding entirely inside our own minds. Think about it for a second. Your brain is a created thing, right? Your thoughts, your language, your wild imagination, all of it belongs to domain D. So even your highest, most abstract mental concept of God is being formed by a created mind. Mistaking that tiny little mental picture for the actual infinite reality of domain G, that's exactly what the framework calls a cognitive idol. As the text lays out for us, we simply cannot exhaust or contain the Creator within human cognitive representations. I mean, you can know true things about God through revelation, absolutely, but you cannot mentally contain Him. Our minds have to be super careful not to worship their own concepts instead of the actual reality those concepts point to. Because of that, the familiar phrase Allahu Akbar, meaning God is greater, acts as this massive philosophical corrective here. It's the ultimate epistemic safeguard. It's a constant reminder that domain G is infinitely greater than every model, every analogy, or every theory we could ever possibly cook up in domain D.
Which brings us to part four, the descent of revelation.
So, this obviously raises a pretty huge question. If human minds can't reach upward to comprehend God, and if domain D can absolutely never cross over into domain G, how do we have true knowledge of Him at all?
Well, the framework solves this through what it models as the Quranic descent. Instead of human intellects desperately trying to reach up, revelation moves downward. It bridges the gap. It starts from an uncreated domain G origin, divine authorship, and literally descends into creation, showing up in domain D as accessible Arabic language, ink, and sound that we can actually grasp. Notice the beautiful duality here. The physical text you read is bound by time and space. That's the D-level manifestation. But the underlying architecture, the source, that carries an uncreated G-level depth that ordinary human minds could never exhaust. It perfectly navigates that absolute boundary. Finally, part 5. Why score it 109.9?
So we've reached the summit of our blueprint, digging into the framework's internal logarithmic rubric. In this system, 10 to the power of 9.9 is the absolute highest score you can possibly get for a humanly created formalization. It's the peak of philosophical and mathematical rigor inside domain D. But notice it doesn't get a perfect 10 to the power of 10.
And that's highly intentional. It limits itself to a 10 to the power of 9.9 score out of sheer epistemic humility. The authors are openly acknowledging that the ADI framework is, at the end of the day, a created thing. It's human philosophy. It belongs in domain D. So it politely steps aside, reserving that flawless 10 to the power of 10 score exclusively for direct revelation originating in domain G.
The ultimate limit is crystal clear. No matter how logically bulletproof or mathematically elegant a human philosophy gets, it's still just a created tool. Its highest possible purpose is just to point humbly back to the uncreated source material.
And this reveals an absolutely critical safeguard, which is really our main takeaway here. When physicists or philosophers peel back the very deepest layers of reality, they aren't going to suddenly uncover God's essence at the bottom. No. The actual bedrock of reality is simply creation's total, utter dependence on the Creator. Creation doesn't somehow become God. It just completely depends on Him. So, I'm going to leave you with a pretty provocative thought to chew on today. If every scientific law, every endless infinity, and literally the most brilliant concept you'll ever formulate in your entire life is still just a dependent domain D creation, what does that tell you about the true, incomprehensible majesty of the uncreated? Thanks for exploring this explainer with me today.